what do you make of the politics of this leak?
Well, I think you're exactly right that this benefits the Democrats who are out of ideas. And by the way, I'm not pro-abortion. I don't think any thoughtful woman or man is pro-abortion. I support a woman's right to terminate a pregnancy, which is never a happy thing. It's always a tragedy. But to go back to the politics of this, two things. You're right that it's the last thing that will turn out those independent suburban women voters for Democrats at a time when Democrats, and I'm a former Democrat, I voted for this administration to my horror, are ruining, everything when it comes to inflation, border security, the economy, and basic constitutional rights. The other thing that I think is worth noting, and you touched on it, is that these decisions this security has never been breached before. So to me, the fact that someone leaked a draft opinion, I'm just reminding people it is a draft opinion. It's not yet an opinion that's been handed down. I read it as yet another kind of demonstration that someone who is not our friend, that the institutions of the United States have no more security, that they have no more honor, no more respect, and that anything can be done to them. And you see this with a president who's clearly cognitively impaired being allowed to continue in office. You see it with the kind of annihilation of all of our symbols, one after another. And so now the Supreme Court, which was the last sacred symbol of our tripartite system, has been shown to be without basic security. I don't know before an investigation who did that, but it is part of it, an ongoing demonstration of our, America's symbols are being mocked. Whoever's behind that, we don't know. But I now want to turn to what I think about this decision, if I may, because it's not as dire for women's issues as one might think. Can I just launch right in?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Thank you. Well, so first of all, a lot of people who are thoughtful do recognize that Roe v. Wade was badly decided. And here's what I mean. I wrote an essay about this long ago called Our Bodies, Our Souls, in which I said, yes, I believe in a woman's right to basic reproductive choice, but this is a bad decision, and here's why. It was decided based on viability. And that means that before the fetus could live outside a woman's body, you could terminate it. And once it could live, you couldn't terminate it. Well, that's just a bizarre and outdated mark, and it's not black and white. So technology has changed, sonograms have changed, tiny preemie babies are living. And so that leads us to this surreal situation in the United States in which women, and I wrote about this when, in Misconceptions, which was about pregnancy, you have a second trimester fetus, you want it, and it's like, oh, look at that cute baby in that sonogram, let's play Mozart to it. Whereas you have a second trimester fetus and you don't want it, and the feminist movement calls it a clump of cells, right? And you can't have it both ways, right? It's either something that should be cherished or not, but you can't pick and choose. And so that did lead to this kind of amoral stance on the part of the abortion rights movement, which I support, right? But it also led to this division in the United States, which is worse than anything in Europe, because reasonable people don't think you should be able to terminate a moving, sentient fetus in the second trimester that feels pain. Whereas in Europe, you don't have this horrible division because you can't terminate second trimester fetuses without all kinds of, extra kind of hoops to jump over. So I do think it was wrongly decided. And also, it doesn't end the right to abortion, even if this turns out to be the Supreme Court decision. It does something that's needed, I think, which is it turns the decision back to the states. And there, a lot of the reasoning in that decision is pretty good. Some of the justices said women are the majority of voters. If they want their elected officials state by state to protect their rights, they can vote that in now. It turns it back to the people and to Congress. And they also are making the point that, one actually the newest female justice said, what about the new laws that allow you to bring a baby to term and then give it up for adoption with no penalty. So that's a reasonable, even a feminist thing to say. You know, it's not like 40 years ago when being an unwed mother would ruin your life, or you wouldn't be able to have the rest of your life if you brought a child to term. So these are reasonable arguments.
Well, let me just ask you about that, Naomi, because if I remember correctly, I think you advised Bill Clinton, of all people, 30 years ago, 25 years ago, whatever it was, that Democrat administration ought to make adoption easier. Would, instead of people having to go to the other side of the planet to adopt, wouldn't it be easier if they were able to adopt 62 million American babies?
Well, thank you for your great memory. I did make the case that adoption should be made easier, and I reached that decision after going to a retreat in which pro-life and pro-choice activists were brought together. And when they actually talked to each other, which they never get to do, they came up with really good policies. Like, I didn't know that pro-life people, a lot of them are willing to make contraception cheaper and easier to obtain to avoid abortion. And they didn't know that pro-choice advocates like us actually would support laws to make adoption easier. So those are sensible things to do to give women real choice. And if you're not part of the kind of establishment, the pro-choice kind of establishment that feeds on headlines like these, then you will want to give women all kinds of options so that women don't feel, as many do, that they are driven to an abortion because they are absolutely desperate and don't see any way of avoiding it. So I did make that case. I didn't advise President Clinton directly. I advised his campaign. And, you know, also polls show that legislation to make contraception more readily available, to make abortion readily available in the first trimester and not so available after that, and also making adoption easier are very popular with that middle ground, those people that are most of us in the middle of the Venn diagram who don't believe in being able to abort a baby till birth, but who also don't believe in restricting all of women's rights to make their own decisions about their bodies.